Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise known as TD3. It is June the 11th, 2025, and if it is Wednesday night, it is Black Men Speak. And no, that is not J.R. Stewart. We have a special guest who is coming back to us to talk about a topic that everyone needs to know about. JR sends his regards. He had some business that he had to take care of this evening. So as a result, he is not going to be here tonight. And I wanted to apologize in advance. But we do have Miss Cheray Scott, who was with us just a few months ago to talk about Medicare. And we're going to talk tonight about another subject tonight that really everybody should know about if you have already not gotten engaged with that. And that is advanced funeral planning. So we're going to talk a little bit about another element of her portfolio and how she services her clients. And so what I'm going to do is to let her briefly introduce herself, and then we will go ahead and move forward with the show.
Okay. Well, thank you, TD3. And I am just pleased to be able to come back and share conversation and some information that may help the community. Most people, when we spoke the last time, know that my nucleus of my practice is insurance, and Medicare is how I started. But what I have found in the last few years of helping and servicing the community is I've learned other things about other pieces, which we'll be talking about tonight, pre-cremation or burial planning, and how important that is, because if anybody's been in Texas for the last 5 years, 7 years, we've seen how inflation has changed housing and housing costs. So what I recognized about 6 months ago is that burial planning is real estate. And so just like we've seen increases in our homes and people who are renting are seeing prices increase, the prices for a prepared cremation or burial are increasing. So that made me start to think this is something I'm doing a disservice to my community if I'm not also bringing this to our attention. So that's why I want to have the conversation. Want it to be light and informative, and people can ask questions, and I'll try to answer them because I'm just here to educate and help anybody who needs or wants the help.
All right, good deal. Thank you very much for that introduction. And before we get started, I wanted to take care of a couple of things. Usually, Jimmy usually handles this, but if you are watching us right now, if you have not done so already, make sure you subscribe to this channel. If you find this content and information informative, make sure that you share this information. Of course, hit that like button, as they would say, if you like the information and you find it useful. For those of you who may not know, you may want to jump on the chat line because I am anticipating that you'll probably want to ask some questions at some point in time this evening. So jump on the chat line. What you need to do is make sure that you log into your Google account. Go to YouTube. Of course, you probably already found us, but you need to log into your Google account so you can jump onto the chat line and ask questions throughout this evening because we've got a lot of information to share. We already have cousin Audrey K on the line. We have Miss Tanya on the line, and we expect some other folks who will be jumping on the chat line as your channel in order to ask some questions about advanced funeral planning and why it is important. So with that being said, we do have to do this before we get started, and we'll spend a little bit more time on this next week. But one of my favorite all-time icons and musical stars passed just yesterday, the great Sly Stone of Sly and the Family Stone became an ancestor just yesterday. If you did not know, one of the most influential and groundbreaking musicians of the late 60s and early 70s who smashed the boundaries of rock, pop, funk, and soul, became an ancestor yesterday at age 82, death caused by COPD and underlying health issues. The family said that he recently completed a screenplay of his life story, and we're definitely going to look forward to having that come out because I would definitely want to see that. And so for those of you who are on the chat line, let me know some of your favorite Sly and the Family Stone music. Dance to the Music had to be one of my all-time favorite songs, Dance to the Music, but he had a lot of great hits that came out through the 70s. So with that being said, we want to send our condolences to
Yeah,
the
that's
world, to the Sly Stone family, and everybody who knew and loved him and listened to his music. And we'll definitely talk a little bit more about that next week. It looks like I also got another um, artist who we'll be talking a little bit more. Wayne Lewis, who is the lead singer of Atlantic Star, just passed as well. I know they made a lot of great ballads as well, so we'll definitely talk more about that next week. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and get back to the topic of the show this evening and talk about advanced funeral planning. Now, help me understand. So you're focused on life insurance and health insurance. How and why does advanced funeral planning fit into what you've been doing, and why did you get involved with it?
Yeah, so primarily focused on Medicare and
Okay.
and then under 65 health insurance. And expanding my practice, I started doing life insurance. I have found that life insurance, for example, many people and people of color, brown and black people, a lot of times were either getting minimal life insurance thinking they were protecting themselves. A lot of people bought term life insurance. Term is only for a term, for a time period. And so what we find is if somebody bought a 30-year term period or a 20-year term period and it expires at age 55 or age 60, people are coming into ages of 62, 65, 68 and finding they have no life insurance. What they thought they had, the term has ended. And so I'm finding more and more people were saying, I don't have any insurance and I don't have anything to prepare my family to bury me. And of course, unfortunately, we've also seen stories where people have reached out to their friends and family on asking for GoFundMe's and things like that.
See it all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So um, I think a lot of it is just lack of knowledge and lack of proper knowledge. And so that's where I feel like it's an important topic, it's narrative to have and discuss. I also do know that our community, our Black and Brown community, sometimes don't want to have the discussions. They don't want to talk about that. But what's interesting is we plan for weddings, we plan for graduation, we plan
Vacations.
vacations, we plan, and we may plan a whole year for vacation. And but the unfortunate thing is we all know that death and taxes are two things we will not be able to get away from. But many people don't want to talk about the planning of death. But the gift that it provides to our family to not only have that prepared ahead of time, and even the peace of mind it provides to ourselves and our families, knowing that we've got some, even if you don't do everything, you do some basis and things that can be added later. It's better to do it now because you're locking in today's prices for what is sure to change. It's not maybe it's going to change, it's sure to change. It could be 7 years, 10 years, 12 years, but as time goes on, the price, what's now 2 or 3,000 for a cremation, we probably are looking at a lot higher, and so we may as well lock in and take care of those things now.
So I don't know of anyone yet who's been able to cheat the inevitable. That is, going to glory. Ideally. um, so you bring up the fact that a lot of people don't really want to talk about planning for the inevitable. But they will plan for vacation, they will plan for weddings, they will plan for all these other things. And I don't want to say, well, let me ask you this. If there was an estimate on numbers in terms of if you look at the entire populace, from what you've seen on average, what percent of the population has any type of plan for their funeral arrangements, give or take?
It may be 10%.
That low.
It may be 10%. But if we break that into a different demographic of minorities, it might be lower than that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So let's get to it. What is pre-burial or pre-needs planning?
Pre-needs planning, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a burial, a formal burial. The people have choices. So a person could choose to be cremated. They can have just a direct cremation alone, or cremation and a ceremony, and that has its set of pricing. Or someone, more traditional families do like to have a full funeral where they pick the casket, the flowers, what they're going to wear, different things like that. They're planning and their plot, and they prepay. And people might be surprised to recognize that these are more affordable than you think. You have options. You can pay it up front, but you can also break it down into 3-year payments, 5-year payments, or 10-year payments. So when people are aware and are educated and know the facts, maybe that would make it less of a fear, and it's not as cost prohibitive as someone might believe, especially if we're starting in our 50s and 60s to just set it up and plan. And if you, even if you start making payments, you can accelerate and pay it off whenever you want to. And
So bottom line, what you're saying is it's just paying for your funeral arrangements in advance through an installment program or paying everything up front.
absolutely. So to use an example,
And what
if I have bought a policy, and it's issued this week, if heaven forbid something happens to me even next week and I've only made one payment, it's an insurance policy, and my full, with that one payment, it's all covered. And my family, just with my directive, let them know that I've got this set up, and they go to the funeral home. There's no waiting for funds. There's no GoFundMe. There's no calling Tommy, calling Tommy and asking for
Tommy ain't gonna
money.
be answering the phone. We know hablo inglés.
But we're laughing about it. But I have a friend who, her partner in life passed away, and he didn't have a lot of plans. They couldn't figure out what he had. They weren't married. They were living together. She had to wait for months to figure out if he even had life insurance. The body stayed in the crematory, or just in the facility, for over 40 days, which they will charge for. They're not going to just keep it for free. And so those are the facts that I like to have a discussion about, so that people are aware that there's a better way. There's a better way.
So most people have insurance. Break down, I mean, for instance, you sell life insurance, health insurance. So most people have some form of insurance. How and why do most people, we understand why they get health insurance. I mean, if a medical issue comes up, it costs less to do that. But most people probably think, well, I got life insurance, so why do I need to do this? Help tie the two together. Why do people get life insurance? Typically in the unlikely event of a death, untimely, for whatever that is, then that helps to cover some of the financial impact of your family, whether that be income or other. Does that, or how does that tie into this conversation?
Right. So I don't want to undermine the value of life insurance. There's a value of it. And life insurance creates an estate for a family. So, for example, to use myself, when I was younger and my son was younger, I wanted to make sure, before I had amassed more assets, that I had money there, so that if I was no longer here, because my life, or if you're married, your spouse's life or partner, it's a value of money. And when it's gone and people are living on, they're going to still have the mortgage, the car notes, the college. At that time I had my son in private school, and that was my wish, to keep him in private school. So the money for private school, and most of us are aspiring that if we're here or not, our children will go to college or a trade school. But these are the things that life insurance provide money for. It's an estate, and it provides money for that. Now, two things. So that is one thing, and it can provide if someone has a funeral. But the problem about traditional life insurance, the funeral home normally can't get that immediately. There's going to be a time frame, some days that it may take for them to get the life insurance. And that's why you sometimes see that people will have to pay for the funeral and wait to be reimbursed by the life insurance company versus a funeral plan or pre-needs plan or cremation plan, whichever one is chosen, provides the funds within 24 to 48 hours directly to the funeral home. There's no delay on funding. There's no asking everybody to pay and I'll pay you back. They do have, I think they have ways that people can take a loan off of the life insurance. And if they do that, then that cuts into some of they take a higher percentage of the money. There's a fee involved. But so that's life insurance has its place, and then this provides just an opportunity for people to know that their needs are met. Now the other thing is needs are met. Like I know what I want for myself, and I want maybe just a simple ceremony and my ashes to be put, Caribbean Sea somewhere, but someone else definitely may want, the full burial. They want a casket. They want certain type of music. They want certain type of flowers, and they may want certain things read. It allows a person to plan as little or as much as you want, but more importantly, your wishes are met as far as how your final remains leave the earth. We know we have a spiritual component, but we also have that the physical remains. What's going to be done? So it gives people peace of mind that they're not going to have families arguing. So in my career, one thing I have done is I also did home health and hospice. Now in hospice, unfortunately, when I would go to the hospital and families were determining hospice, you'll find that families start arguing more than ever when somebody's dying or they have passed away. So this becomes a dividing subject matter in families. So to take that away and make everything simple and more peaceful, not only do you have peace of mind that it's taken care of, financially it's not a burden to the family, emotionally it's a tough time. If a family goes to the funeral home at need is when someone has passed away, they're going to spend more money. Unfortunately, the funeral homes, you're at their mercy. So you're at their mercy, or your family is at their mercy. I don't think any of us want that. We don't work years and years and build assets and savings and things for our money to just be eaten away by people being greedy and unrealistic when people are emotional. And they tell most of us if somebody's passed away, don't make financial decisions, don't make major decisions. But most families are having to go to a funeral home and be at their mercy at need. And you will probably likely pay a lot more at that time. Don't you have a story, Tommy?
Yeah, if I can put a pin in there right now, because I've had a couple of uncles who passed in the last couple of years, and one of the things that I've learned, because I've usually been on the outside looking in, but in one of these cases, I was kind of the fly on the wall, even though I was working with my family members. It wasn't my parent, but someone who was close to me. And one of the things that you pointed out that I did learn is that once the event has occurred, once your loved one has passed, someone that you're responsible for has passed, they got you and they know it. And it's business, but that's what it is. It's business. One of the things that I heard is that, that the funeral person said, the funeral administrator said, is that, if you had planned this in advance, you had maybe some options that you could work with. But now that you are at need, otherwise your loved one has passed, you don't really have any options. The price is the price, and yesterday's price is not today's price. And so this is what you're going to get, and you just have to make a decision as to whether you're going to be in this plot or that plot. And they know they got you. And it's a frustrating situation, because when you're at that place, usually someone has passed within the last couple of days to a week. Emotionally, you're compromised, and you're having to make some pretty difficult decisions on the spot. And unfortunately, they are in the business of making money. And so as a result, this is one of those things that most people have to realistically consider. Now, going back to an earlier point, I asked about the life insurance. Usually, life insurance is used in order to replace income. Otherwise, you still have a mortgage, you still have operating costs, etc. Some people can use life insurance to help pay for the insurance costs, but that does not mean, number one, that you have enough if you have it, or number two, that that is still not going to put you in a financial burden of some sort. So I guess one of my questions is, could this not be considered kind of like an insurance policy of some sort, even
Oh,
though it's
it's
called
absolutely insurance. It's insurance. It's whole like it's a type of insurance that it guarantees the funds. This is why when I use the example of myself, if I'm insured by this week and I haven't something that takes my life next week with one payment, my burial is covered because it's an insurance policy. Now I see that Miss Audrey Booker gave a great comment here that the beneficiary, there's no delay as long as the cost of funeral is verified with insurance. I'm finding that some funeral homes have gotten that situation together and some have not, because one of my best friends, when she dealt with her partner, that was not the case, or it just took a long time, and his body was there for quite some time. But maybe part of the problem is they didn't know where his insurance was. They
Mm.
didn't know what insurance he had, where the insurance was, and that could be why that was more of a delay. But more importantly, where I'm seeing seniors, where I'm in the space of life that I'm in with my business, I see a lot of seniors who are 62, 63, 65, and they had been under the impression they still had life insurance, but term life is only for a term. So if it's gone, now you don't have any insurance. And when you get older, what bothers me a lot is people who are educating people don't give all the options and explain things to younger people well. And they might say, oh yeah, term is fine. And then when at 55 or 65 or 68, when you really need it and you think, any day, in the next couple of years, I may be expiring, or even 10 years from now, you have no insurance. And to reapply for life insurance at age 60, anything, you know,
Very expensive.
very expensive. And by this time, we've got more comorbidities. Comorbidities are your illnesses, your weight, high blood pressure and all that's not much. But these other things, diabetes, weight, and all the health issues that make it to where you may be able to get life insurance, but it's going to be so cost prohibitive that some people will say, you know what, I'm not even going to bother. And so that is something I'm seeing quite frequently. Actually, just recently helped a couple of people this month because their term life insurance had gone and they don't have that anymore. And it's harder for them to qualify. So they wanted to make sure they had the money. And they didn't necessarily, they wanted a full burial. And they may not have had or felt comfortable for Mr. and Mrs. that they had the 15,000 or 18,000 per person to provide for a burial. So, and they didn't want their children to have to come up with that. So they prepared.
Gotcha. Want to acknowledge a couple of people on the chat line. Unitan News. I don't know who that person's name is. We want to thank them for joining us. Unitan News. We also have Mr. Collegiate. That is Brother Frederick V. Roberts, Esquire, out of Prairie View, Texas. We want to thank you for joining us. So you mentioned term versus whole life, the simple version of it, the quick version of it. You've come across a lot of people who've had term life. It expires. They're, for lack of a better term, butt out. Why do people get term versus whole life insurance?
Well, typically term is cheaper. And whomever is educating the consumer may or may not have done a job of explaining the value of having whole life or an IUL, a permanent life insurance policy, that at some point you may not have to make premium payments anymore, but it can sustain you to the 62, 65, 68, 72, 75, 85. And when we need to have these policies, when we need it most, sometimes we don't have that anymore. Now, I do think that most people make that decision because it's cheaper, and some brokers or agents um, may choose the path of least resistance with the client and just say, okay, sure, and just show them the cheaper instead of educating them about everything and what this means to you, Mr. Client. and then let their client make the decision if they want to do something or have something that's going to sustain them beyond 60, 65, 68, 70 and on.
Gotcha. So we talk about most people have some form of life insurance, whether it's term or whole life insurance, term being for a certain period, 30, 40 years, but when it's gone, it's gone. A whole life, of course, you have it until.
Let me just correct you for a second. It's not going to be 40 years. It's 20, 10, 15, 20, 25. Most times after age 40 something, they will not write anything longer than a 20-year policy. So if you're in your 40s, late 40s, and you go ahead and rewrite, then, it's 60s, you're out. Well, people are living to
So the longest,
70s, 80s.
so with term life, the longest term you're going to typically have is what again with term life?
When you get to a certain age, and it could be different for different companies, but generally speaking, by the time you've gotten to your 40s, if you're writing a term life policy, they're not going to let you do a 30-year. It's not likely.
Well, what if you're like in your 20s or 30s?
In your 20s, you will be able to get a 30-year, but 20s in your 30-year, your 50s, and then you have no insurance, and then you've got to reapply again.
So you don't really have any 40-year term life plans.
I haven't seen any in a long time. I don't see that. I see 30-year for the younger people, but people that are in their 40s and certainly 50s, they're probably going to stop you at 15-year.
Gotcha. Okay.
For term. Right. Permanent's different, right? But for term life, the older we get, they're not going to sell you too long of a term policy.
Gotcha. If you have a life insurance plan if you have life insurance, is it either or both? Otherwise, which is better, pre-burial planning or life insurance, and why?
That's a personal choice. I'm just here to educate people about their options. Me personally, I have both. I have a permanent life insurance policy. At one time, I had term and perm when I wanted to have more money before my son was educated in college. But once we've exhausted, my house is almost paid off, my child's out of college, some of the things that I was planning for, what if, they're no longer an issue for me. So the permanent insurance policy is here just to leave some money and some estate money for my child, pay off last bills. And my burial policy is for my peace of mind. And my son was grateful that I had prepared, and I was able to say, hey, I've done this, and this is what you just go to that folder, and these things are taken care of. So I have both, but that's a personal choice, and I'm not here to make decisions for anyone. I just want to educate people, and then they choose what's best for them, or what they think is something they may want to add or not.
Gotcha. Even though we do have folks from outside of the Texas area, do prepaid funeral plans work differently in different states? We're in Texas, for instance, but how do they work in Texas, or are they pretty much the same any state that you're at, give or take?
Well, even in the state of Texas, I mean, what I'm finding, because I'm here helping clients now, I've actually gone to several funeral homes in the community, and prices differ from for a cremation from each funeral home to each funeral home, and a couple places will allow a little bit of negotiation, and then cremation, burial, the prices do differ. So you can shop around and choose a funeral home and see the environment you want your memories to be visited at, and what kind of costs are associated with that. Now, Texas is, I like one thing about Texas, I like in all streams of business that I do, Texas has very strict laws, and they protect Texans very well. So there's a Texas Department of Banking that these contracts are backed by. So that, let me just put it out there. If someone gets a funeral and plans with Apple Funeral Home up the street, and Apple Funeral Home goes out of business, you're still protected. So that's important to know, that Texans are protected by Texas Department of Banking. And that funeral home is typically acquired or bought out, or your contract can be honored at another funeral home. So you have not lost money. I don't, honestly, Tommy, I don't want to misrepresent. I don't know what the backing is from other states, like I know Texas.
Gotcha.
I don't know that.
Okay. No, and what do pre-needs or advanced funeral planning, what all you talked a lot about it, a little bit about it earlier. What are the different items? What are the different things that this would cover other than the real estate that they're going to be um, landing in?
Yeah, this might be a good time to bring up one of those screens that I have,
Sure.
because funeral planning, it covers things like caskets, the urns, opening and closing of a casket, the transportation. We forget about, the limousine, there's a
Are we talking
police.
about this one?
Yes, yeah. The police escorts to and from. So, and then the transportation, the limousines for your family, flowers. If you're going to do a memorial service, even if you decide you're going to do it at the church, they have to transport and set up the body to the church and then bring it back over to memorial service. If you're going to have a wake, typically plots and headstones are done separately. And then a lot of veterans are provided plots and headstones. That's something that normally is a benefit, but other things around that, they still have to plan.
Why is that? Why would they be separate since it's all a part of the same?
I do not know the answer to that. I wish I could tell you, and I don't lie about anything. So I don't know
And the
why
interesting thing,
plots and headstones are separate. But even veteran or non-veteran, that typically is the situation. Plots and headstones are separate, but maybe because of the variation in pricing as time goes on. But when you're doing the final expenses, it is the casket, the urn, the opening, the closing, the transportation, the escorts, flowers, memorial service. Those things are really what you're looking at.
there's a
Music.
lot. There's
There's a lot.
I was looking at the list of items because most of these funeral homes they have a package of things, and I mean it is a litany of different things that most people, unless you've done funeral planning before, you don't even consider. It's not just the land, the casket, and the funeral program. That's barely scratching the surface.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, to help people, when I first was talking to somebody that helped me recognize how these costs are going up and what it entails, they said something that I thought was poignant, and I want to pass it on. Even if somebody does pre-planning, you don't have to plan everything. You don't have to. You can do some basics and have the basics done, and then allow for some of the other things to be picked later. As far as maybe the flowers, or the transportation. I have a girlfriend who we did some planning for her family, and she works for the police department, so she's able to, or if you know someone who can help with the ushering, or the guiding of the crowd to and fro. Those are things that may be able to be done later. But if you do at least some basics, that still can help, and then the other things could be added later.
Gotcha. No, that's a very good point. I
It
will.
can be overwhelming.
I can say this: if there is anything that I can say to people, and again, I've been very fortunate. Knock on wood, both of my parents are still living, but I've had some relatives and some that are relatively close to me that live. The time to really begin to plan for this is not at the time that your loved one has become deceased, because in a lot of cases, depending on the circumstances, you could be emotionally compromised. If you don't have advanced planning, you may be financially compromised. People literally get into fights over this, and this is going back years, and talking to some of my other friends who've lost parents and loved ones. And I don't want to say every family is the same, but when you have a lot of siblings or a lot of folks who are weighing in on what your loved one, your mother, your father, your aunt, your uncle would have wanted, the way they should have wanted it, what they would have, who's providing the eulogy, what should be in the program, who should be mentioned in the program, where on the plot, on the funeral, at the cemetery it should be. There are a lot of things that come up that if you've not done it before, it takes a lot of emotional energy to go through that. So there's a lot to go through, and I know you'll probably talk about this a little bit more. Just going through a consultation process, talking with someone like a Cheray can help you begin to think through this, because some of us, most of us have all been through it. Some of our seniors in our lives and even our younger folks. Either one, they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to deal with the reality of having to make the hard decisions, and or they think that they are too young to really have a serious conversation about it. And we know how many young people are passing today we never would have thought, whether it's in a car accident, a healthcare catastrophe, or something that they had no idea about in terms of their personal life.
Yeah, yeah. My cousins, their mother passed away. She was sick, but it was a shock when she passed away. And and when I talked to him, then he did say, "Ask your parents, ask your parents to plan this so that you won't have to go through that." And I remembered feeling fear that I would have to go through it. And so I was grateful. I felt a sigh of relief when I knew my parents had done that. And I felt a sigh of relief when I did for my own needs and for my son. It just felt good. It felt really, really good to know that that was not going to be something that anybody else would worry about, or in their time of mourning, they have to deal with this and be taken advantage of.
I know that this is going to differ depending on the cemetery that you're dealing with, the funeral home that you're dealing with, and all these other factors in terms of how extravagant you want it to be as opposed to simple. But what is the average cost or a reasonable range on a cost when it comes to planning something like this? And I know that's a depends, but
It
there's
does.
there's probably, there's probably an average or at least a range that you're dealing with. And part of
Yeah,
that fear is not knowing.
right. I understand that, and I felt the same way. So general cremation in Texas in the DFW area is running about 2,900. Again, some funeral homes may offer, they may give a little discount on that, and that's just the cremation alone. If you want a cremation with a memorial service, that's going to cost a little bit more. By the time you do some of that, you may be looking at about another $1,000. You might be looking
I,
at 3,900, 3,500, something like that.
and
Now,
what does that cremation involve when you say a cremation service? What is that literally for people who don't know?
well, cremation is where your remains are burned,
Okay.
and then a person could provide an urn. They could provide an urn. There are some people that have asked me to have a necklace or certain type of vehicle, certain things for their son or daughters to have their ashes kept. Or some people can choose to go ahead and do the cremation and have a cremation of their remains put into a plot. They can still have a cremation and have a small plot. But then you have people who are doing the traditional that absolutely want a funeral where they want their casket and the people to view them and see their body, and the procession comes behind, and then they're actually buried. And that in Dallas, you're looking at probably about 12,000, 14,000, give or take. You may be able to get some places that will do it for about 8,900, and that's just the basic service and things like that.
And when we say basic, what does that look like?
Oh, oh, it's really it really becomes, like you said, so intricate. Like, because we're talking about if somebody's picking their casket and the opening and the
And
closing
chances ain't cheap.
and, and transportation and funeral and flowers, then we might be going up to 18,000.
Mm.
18,000, 16, 17, 18,000, 20,000, depending on the casket alone. Depending on the casket you choose, could be 2,000 to 4,000 to 6,000. Now, Amazon sells caskets, Costco sells caskets. So I try to tell people to think about those are options to consider. If I wouldn't tell anybody they needed to buy an urn from a funeral home for a cremation when you can order one on Amazon. Those things you can get that cheaper somewhere else and save some money there. So again, the benefit of pre-planning and having some of these things figured out ahead of time, because when you're trying to have a funeral in a couple of days, you're probably not running around looking for these things on Amazon. And Costco's at the
You don't
last.
have time to do it.
No.
And then when you go to the funeral home because you got to do it because you want to get it done within a couple of weeks or whatever that looks like, they know they got you and they can charge you whatever they want, not obviously out of compliance with state law, but they know that they're getting a payday because you got to have it.
And some people some people may be okay with that. For example, if someone says, "I've got life insurance and my funeral home has agreed to it," if the funeral home charges 30,000, they don't care. It was in the life insurance, and that's a possible that is a person's prerogative. Versus if somebody pre-planned and could have gotten it for 15,000, and let some more of their assets go to the family. Those
Gotcha.
are the things that people. I will say that more people who are not Black and brown think like that, where they make sure that they have things planned and they have it within a price that's contained, so that more assets are going to the family rather than to the funeral home. But it's all a choice.
I
And
understand.
yeah.
I understand. So let's say you do this pre-planning, you talk to someone, you go through a consultation, you kind of go through this process. Well, I want, the green, the yellow, the polka dot, or whatever the case is, you start making, because I'm assuming you can do installments versus full payment, correct? What
Yes.
what happens, because one thing that I've learned is that there's over the years been a consolidation of these funeral homes changing hands, ownership, etc. What happens when you may be planning with a particular funeral home? They may change hands, they may get gobbled up by a large entity. What happens to your investment?
Right. So the contract you have is not with the funeral home. It is with the life insurance company. And then that's honored, as mentioned before, through the Texas Department of Banking. And the Texas Department of Banking, or trust in Texas, is what backs your contract. So it's not with Apple Funeral Home or Orange Funeral Home. It's with the insurance company backed by the Texas Department of Banking. And if another funeral home, if one goes out of business, they're typically acquired by another one. Or you could just say, I don't want this one anymore. You can transfer. You can take your policy and transfer your policy to another funeral home. And most funeral homes are going to honor the prepaid pricing and wishes. Even if you move from another state, from Texas to another state, they do offer ability to transfer the policies.
Gotcha. Okay. What happens if you move out of state? You got a plan with a funeral home in the DFW area, Houston, or whatever the case is. You end up moving out of state. Well, what happens?
So you call the insurer. Like, for example, one of the companies I write through is National Guardian Life, and that's who your policy is with, not the funeral home. And you call National Guardian Life, and then they will help you look at funeral homes in the state or area that you've now resided in and help place you. You can transfer.
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. And folks, while
That's a
you
great question. That's very important. It is a good question. We don't always know, even myself at almost 58, I have my plans, but what happens if I choose to pick up and leave at 70 and go to Florida, then I'm going to transfer it.
gotcha.
That's important. Yeah.
And for those of you who are listening right now, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to ask questions in the chat line. So we have about 15 minutes left, give or take. So do please make sure you put any questions that you may have in the chat line. Can someone change once they've started? You say you don't have to do everything. Can they change the essence of their, advanced funeral plan? Can they cancel it? How does that work?
I'm sure you could cancel it by not paying the policy. I don't know how smart that is.
Right.
But I want to bring up here, there's a revocable and irrevocable. That's important. Most of the times I encourage these, when I write them, we do them irrevocable. They cannot be changed. But that protects, like, let's just say, I've got a policy and I've got 2 or 3 children, and I pass away and I've paid for this policy and I paid for a full, Taj Mahal funeral. When my kids decide that they don't want to do a Taj Mahal funeral, they're just going to cremate me and change up the policy and keep the money. those things can happen. So you encourage that the policy is written irrevocable so
Mhm.
that those changes can't be made.
So
Now,
how would they be able to go and undo what you've done?
if you make sure that the policy is written so that it is irrevocable, that protects you.
So if you've put together an advanced funeral directive, somebody else before you pass, or are you talking about after you pass can go get you?
After you passed, or
Okay,
even maybe I'm getting older and I have dementia and I've got greedy kids and,
gotcha.
and I've got a full Taj Mahal funeral plan and they recognize the value there. If I don't have it irrevocable, then they could go back and make changes and get back money and maybe make a basic cremation and change all my wishes. So irrevocable is important. Now, part of your other question is if we said, if you just want to start somewhere and do some basic planning, you do your basic planning and then get back to the funeral home and the insurance company, or maybe you just go to the funeral home and then pay for the additional things you want to add later as needed. But you may have locked in your price for cremation and maybe add a memorial service later, or burial, and I'm going to add the opening, closing, or my transportation wishes later and pay for that as able. But I've locked in the basics, some of the basics in today's pricing, like the casket, like the urns, the funeral expenses. I've locked in some of those things today so that I'm not going to have those things.
And so as you add those different things, then the cost or the installment goes up as you.
I would think if you're going to add those different things that you go to the funeral home and just pay it. You might just get your basic casket and opening and closing done, and then you can go in and just pay the difference of the things you want to add later.
Okay.
And even the funeral home director that educated me about the way inflation is affecting this industry, she was just saying, I mean, you do the basics and then your family may do the extra later, but they don't have the full thing to deal with.
Thank you for
If they
bringing.
got to do the flowers, the transportation, that's not a lot compared to the real meat and bones of funeral.
You bring up a very good point in terms of inflation. Given everything that's going on right now, of course, there's some people who are screaming that inflation, it's killing us, and then now we've got more things that are causing more inflation. So, what obviously the cost of real estate is going up, the cost of everything is going up year over year. So, when you do a advanced funeral directive, that locks in the pricing on everything, or doesn't it?
It does lock in today's prices.
Okay.
So if you do a cremation and a burial service and you've decided that this is what you're going to do and you're paying 3,600, you can make payments. You can make it over a lump sum, or you could do 3-year, 5-year, or 10-year payments. But even if you're making payments, you can expedite and just pay it off and just know it's done. Just know it's done. But it's locking in. So if that cremation 7 years later, which more people are choosing cremation, it's a more affordable option. So the likelihood, the law of supply and demand, when the demand is high and trends are that way, what does the economy people do? They tend to raise prices around what people are doing more. So what may cost 2,900 to 3,900 today, very easily in 6 or 7 years could be 7,000, 8,000. And that's just, I mean, who would have, nobody could tell me how the price of real estate in Texas has jumped. No, I could not have believed it in the past 5, 6, 7 years.
Well, I always go back to one of our former governors, Pretty Ricky Perry, who invited all of the Californian corporate entities to Texas, and how talked about how great it was going to be bringing all those jobs here. But what people did not anticipate was all of the inflation, traffic, and everything else. It is not just California, but definitely I remember his focus was these basically going into partnership with a lot of these California corporations and bringing them here to bring in all the jobs. And people did not anticipate what was going to come along with that in terms of housing, traffic, congestion, and everything else. But not getting sidetracked there. Inflation is not going away, and it's just a natural part of life. So, folks, we have about maybe five or so minutes So if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat line. So as we begin to summarize and kind of wrap up our conversation, what are some other things that you have experienced during your conversations with people as it pertains to planning for things like this that you would say people should take into consideration?
Okay, that's a good question.
Yeah,
I do want to also bring up that I
nuances.
have been told that the pricing for cremation and funerals in Texas is more affordable than probably California. I mean, the same situation applies. It's real estate. So,
Right.
so in some of these other states, these prices for these things are going to be higher than what we're talking about in Texas today. Now that's going to probably change. But another thing that is good to mention is that there is an insurance people can purchase that if, for example, a lot of us like to travel. And even I've talked about being an expat at some point in my life where maybe my plans are here, but I might live 2 or 3 or 4 months out somewhere else. There's an insurance that you can buy. And I don't have the name of it at my hand right now. You can buy an insurance. It's a flat rate that actually covers the cost of transporting your body back to your area, which is important to think about if you're going to be living somewhere else or if you're traveling a lot, to have this insurance that can actually cover the cost of transporting your body back to United States so that all of your wishes here can be executed, because that can be very expensive.
Yep.
That can be very expensive.
Gotcha. No, that completely makes sense. And going back to a basics conversation, and again, this is something that most people really don't understand until they are involved with it. I mean, some people get confused about, okay, I'm dealing with the funeral home, I'm dealing with the cemetery. Who help us understand the difference in working with a funeral home versus a cemetery? And if someone does want to get more information about pre-needs planning, who should they consult with? Obviously you, because you do this as well. But some people, unless they've actually been through this process before, they don't understand the difference between the entities that are involved in all of this. And
So it doesn't have to be me. I'm here to educate and I'm here to help people if they want me to help them. But you could go to the funeral home. They have people who that's what they do. That's all they do is they sitting in the office and they are there to either help you with pre-needs or at needs. So you can go to Evergreen or Golden Gate, Mansfield Memorial. You can go to any one of these, and they have people there that can help you plan. And sometimes people might prefer that because they want to see the place and maybe see the environment. But I have clients that also like the fact that I can meet them at their home, and they don't
what
have to
services?
go to a
Thank
funeral home. And I have done some shopping around, and I have a book of different funeral homes in this area, and can talk to them about the options and prices. Some people already know about Evergreen or Golden Gate or Mansfield Memorial, and they know what it is, and so they just want to sit in the comfort of their home and sit and talk about it, and not have to go to the funeral home.
so that people can understand, what services do you provide in terms of the planning process, and then how do you interact with the funeral home and or cemetery?
Well, I have to. I'm contracted for this particular purpose with National Guaranteed Life and another company I just contracted with. So I don't have their name off the top of my head, but I have agreements with a lot of these funeral homes in the DFW area, where I've gone to them, I've spoken to them, I have their price sheet. So when we talk, I have the price sheet for the Evergreen or Golden Gate or Mansfield Memorial or different ones around Grand Prairie, and we can talk about what their prices are, their list for the caskets and things like that. I have their prices, and we can sit in your home and we can talk about it, and we can do it that way versus them going out to the funeral and home and doing that. But I can do it. I also offer other services, primarily healthcare, Medicare, under 65 insurance, life insurance. I offer those things, but it's just that I found that it would be a disservice to know this information and not be able to offer it if people want me to help them with it.
Okay.
And when I write my clients and I let them know what I'm doing, I found that people were like, you know what? I don't have term insurance anymore. It's gone now. I don't have this anymore. I need to plan it. So I actually found that people did say that exactly. Not everybody, but people will say, oh, I don't have this anymore. I thought I had it. I don't have it. or I don't have the money really, so I want to plan and make some payments so that at least if I make a payment of $60 a month, then I know that I'm taken care of because I may not have 7,000 laying around, or my kids don't. I don't want my kids to pay it, or 10,000 or 12,000, depending on what you choose, how much it's going to become cost for you.
Gotcha. So in essence, you have more personalization, so to speak, in working with you, and you connect with and or work with different funeral homes.
I do have different funeral homes. I've had some people ask me about funeral homes, and then when they ask me, I pursue asking them. Some funeral homes, a lot of them let me work with them, but some will say, no, we only want our people.
Gotcha.
Transparency. And I am not, I don't take it personally. I'm just here to educate. And however I can try to help people and educate the community. I mean, I definitely know that to me, this is good information that I learned from and I acted on. And if somebody's learned something today, or it's brought some discussions where you can now talk to your family about it and say, hey, we need to think about this. Maybe let's get a shell of a burial plan or cremation done. That's all I want to do is stimulate the conversation, have the narrative, let's get it going. And then I feel like my purpose is served. If they use me or if they go to the funeral home, that's fine.
Gotcha. What, to kind of close this out, do you believe is the greatest risk for those of us out there who may?
But if they do want to use me, Tommy, we do need to put my business card.
And I'm getting to that. Okay. With that being said, I'm going to put it up twice. I'm going to put it up twice because I was going to put that up after I asked the next question.
Okay.
But for anyone who does want to get in contact with Cheray, this is her contact information, her website, email address, and her business phone here so that you can get more information, whether it has to do with Medicare, insurance, and or pre-needs planning. Please make sure that you get this information down, and we'll put that in before we close out again. What is the biggest risk? Because we do have, and I include myself in this, we do have loved ones who just don't want to talk about this. Or when you engage them about it, they kind of kick the can and say, yeah, I'll get to it, I understand. What's at risk here?
I just don't, I don't know. I don't, in my mind, if I'm educating people or if we're bringing conversations,
and we're not,
how can it be a risk? I mean, if you bring it up and if they choose to do it, great. But if they don't choose to do it up, well, at least you know you tried.
right.
You know, I don't know, no, we can't force people. I don't twist arms. I don't do that type of intimidating business. And I just hope that the conversation and being able to feel comfortable to bring it to this community whom we're talking to today. Now they take it on to their friends, their family, their cousins, their parents, and people start having conversations and hopefully start executing, saying, let's put something down, mom, dad, or even ourselves. Let's do something. Even if we do with something basic and add to it later, let's just start. And then we can have that peace of mind that we've done something.
Okay, I'm going to say something that you probably are not in a position to say. I can talk directly because
yes.
I had to deal with it. One, you're going to spend more money, period. Bottom line. I don't care how you do it. If you decide to continue to kick the can, because when I first asked someone who I love very dearly about estate planning, those types of things, they kick the can. I know it costs more now than it did 7-8 years ago when I first asked them about it. And I know real estate costs a heck of a lot more. It didn't have directly to do with pre-needs planning, but it was something else that's just essential. So if you asked your loved one 3 years ago, I guarantee you, just like rent is higher, this is going to be higher. Number two, peace of mind, because most people that I've talked to who've had, especially those with multiple siblings, peace of mind, because one, different folks are going to have different ideas about what should be done on behalf of their loved ones, how the money should be used, where they should be buried, all of these different types. Mama would have wanted this, daddy would have wanted this, grandpa, etc. That's going to be an issue. And you really don't know what your loved one needs unless you engage them. And even if you have to do that in a soft, loving way, even if you have to be indirect about it. I mean, I asked my dad, he loves to sing. He sang in the choir. I asked him, who would you want to sing? Who would you want to provide, well, where Fortunately, he does. He's at least gotten the process started, but it's just getting into the details because I guarantee you, people will weigh in terms of what they think your loved one would have wanted, and only your loved one knows. You got to have a conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to be some drama, period. All right, folks, we are just about out of time. It's 9 o'clock. I want to thank Ms. Cheray for providing us.
Thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak. And I want to end by saying, if we do these things the right way, what we hope is that we have a celebration of life rather than arguing and fighting and
Which
grievance.
happens.
Yeah,
Which is
but
going
I've seen it done both ways, and when it's prepared, it's beautiful to see a celebration of life that's been prepared and done, and that people are honored with their life memory in the way they intended it to be. We intend to be so.
we want to thank you again, and we will definitely have you back in the future. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share your information one more time as we close out today's conversation on advanced funeral planning. And ladies and gentlemen, again, share this information with somebody. And I'm pretty sure that everybody needs to share this information with someone, and definitely like this show if this information has been useful to you in any way. And of course, join us next week because, of course, if it is Wednesday night, it is definitely Black Men Speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some information. And I thank you all for being here.
Absolutely.